Welcome everyone around the world joining us for Ask the Howlers episode 26, Global Cyber Insurgency. And yes, of course, as we have done for the last few months, we are live. It's such a pleasure to host you all again. And those who don't know me, my name is James Aliband. I'm Senior Security Strategist and Manager of Product Marketing at VMware. Now, before we dive into the session today, remember, this is a cybersecurity expert roundtable. This is where trusted advisors and security strategists discuss the latest threats and security challenges, providing actionable tips and resources, and most importantly, to answer your questions. Last time out, it was so good to be joined by Craig Savage. Craig is part of our VMware security team, and he was here discussing how to secure your critical infrastructure, and I hope you all took valuable insights from that. Now, of course, before I do introduce my guest today, I want to make sure and to remind you that we have the Q&A running. This is where you're about to ask questions live today, and we'll answer them in just a few moments. And of course, also my ask is, when you are posting to the Q&A, tell me where you are, which country you're in, which state you're in, where you're listening from. It's always great to see how many different places that we're heading to and how many different places we're touching across the world. Now, with no further ado, I am super, super excited to introduce my guest today. My guest is Tom Kellermann, who is the head of cybersecurity strategy at VMware and a member of the Secret Service Cybercrime Board. Tom, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to speak to you today.
It's going to be such a pleasure, as always, to have you on, Tom. Tom, as you know, I start these sessions off with a little icebreaker, a bit out of security in that sense. And I was thinking earlier, what question do I want to ask you in that sense? And I actually I came up with a question I thought maybe just touching on another part that you certainly enjoy. So, Tom, before we jump in, I want to know, is there a restaurant, if any restaurant in the world that you can go and eat at, which restaurant would that be, and where would that be?
It's Barcelona. It's a Spanish tapas place, and it's in downtown DC.
Awesome. So downtown DC, Barcelona. And what would you be ordering from the menu?
I would order the buhi steak, the gambas al ajillo, the chicken, and probably the meatballs too. All protein all day.
Protein all day. I love it. And I was going to add as well, I thought, well, without further ado, I'm going to obviously tell you what mine would be as well. And for me, it's the Hatriclin Bistro in South Tel Aviv. I found this out of nowhere. Essentially, this small little bistro in South Tel Aviv, typically where restaurants aren't as well. And I'm going to have the rump steak from there with a small glass of Israeli red wine. Honestly, the best steak I've ever tasted. So with that, and obviously, for all the food lovers out there as well, on the Q&A, tell us where you get your meals from. We want to know that as well. Now, Tom, just before we do jump into today's session, of course, around global cyber insurgency, I just want to spend just a couple of minutes getting to know you, and of course for our fellow listeners as well, just to get to know you a little bit more. As of course, you are such an influential member of the cybersecurity community. Where did it all start for you? Can you take us back into where it all started for you in cybersecurity?
Yeah, there was two inflection points. One when I was 11, I was growing up in Guatemala, and my father was a U.S. diplomat, and this DEA agent that was trying to date my older, attractive sister was waiting in the foyer while I was fooling around on my dad's computer, and in trying to make me enamored with him and the fact that he's a good guy, and obviously put in a good word with my sister, he tries to chat me up. He shows me his gun. He shows me his bullets. He gives me a bullet. And then he asks me, do you think I know how to build this gun and build this bullet? Now, as a kid growing up overseas, I presumed everyone did, kind of like Legos. And then he showed me, if you type this in, that's your gun. If you type this in, that's your bullet. Now push enter. And my screen changed. It was basically DOS prompts back then, pinging and ponging systems. And he says, just remember, that's your gun, that's your bullet, and play with that. And soon you can go out there and shoot computers. And so that's where my dabbling, in the dark arts and the gray spaces of the world began. But where it really kind of escalated was when I was visiting my parents in Peru in grad school. And I wanted to get out of the house. And I said, Mom, I need to go somewhere. We were locked up on this compound. And she allowed me to go out with a different DEA agent to a nightclub. And we saw these narcos there with their girlfriends. And they actually sent us a bottle of Blue Label, at which point I'm freaking out saying, we need to get out of here. They're going to kill us. And my friend Paul, or the DEA agent Paul, says to me, relax. They've known where we are all day. They've been tracking our every movements because they've hacked all of our phones and communication systems at the embassy. And I said, there's no way those guys know how to do that. And they said, they're not the ones doing that. It's former KGB Eastern Europeans, particularly East Germans, that are acting as consultants to help them undermine the effectiveness of DEA operations and the embassy. And that's when I really became cognizant of the illicit transnational corporation and the Pax Mafioso that exists, and really how technology can be used to undermine regimes as a whole.
That's phenomenal, and I of course have heard that story so many times, but I think it's so good to tell everybody, an insight into that. And just the last thing, Tom, just before we do jump in, of course, you're looking back to 2008 as well. You were appointed the commissioner on the Commission of Cybersecurity for the 44th President of the United States. What did you take away from that role itself, and really setting you up for the years to come after that?
What I realized is that there was a shortage of cybersecurity professionals nationwide, and there was a lack of holistic understanding of the interdependencies that existed. In addition, I was very much appreciative of the fact that that regime and subsequent regimes, up until this one, were very reticent to react with active cyber defense countermeasures against nation-state adversaries that were conducting these insurgencies within American cyberspace. And that reluctance to escalate with retribution for cyber attacks in cyberspace has created this perfect storm that we exist in today that we'll speak of today. But I think that the paradigm and the stratagems are shifting with the new leadership of the Biden administration and the truly grade A personalities who are now running cyber for the U.S. government.
Thank you. So switching gears into today's topic, and thank you for giving us an insight into how and what's led you up to today. And it really, I think, level sets for our community into you ultimately, but also what you give VMware taking forward the head of cybersecurity strategy here. You did a keynote, Tom, talking to America's cyber insurgency, and of course, America's 4th of July Independence Day weekend was like many other national weekends and holidays, as of course in the headlines, like many others across the year, we've seen the wrong headlines from our point of view. To a certain extent, we were talking the other day and saying maybe we need to have our own secret holidays so we actually get some time off. But of course, I'm talking here about the Kaseya ransomware attack. Tom, I'm going to dig real deep onto this first as a first question, and I want to kind of work backwards from there. But are we really truly seeing an insurgence of cyber attacks?
Yes. And most importantly, we're seeing a Pax Mafioso that exists between specific rogue nation states and their very best cyber criminals and cybercrime cartels. And that attack, the REvils attack, really had to be blessed. It had to be blessed. The timing was not a coincidence, as I don't believe there are such things in cyber attacks or cyber warfare. And the nature in which there was a zero-day exploit employed against the VSA services of Kaseya that then allowed for the island hop into a multitude of MSPs, that then allowed for ransomware to be propagated to sabotage the systems of thousands of organizations, shows that there was, at a minimum, a blessing and a harboring of REvil. But more importantly, I think that there was tech transfer, because that group has never been known to be a group notorious for creating zero-day exploit code. And I do think that code was shared.
No, and I think that kind of leads me into my second question as well, is, taking a pivot back to just nearly 8 months, seven to 8 months ago, of course, with SolarWinds. What's changed or hasn't changed in that sense since SolarWinds up until the Independence Day weekend? And why do you think that these attacks are continuing to have this insurgency across the landscape? And should we be really fearful to, these are not going to stop, and if anything, they're only going to get worse?
Sad to say, they are going to get worse because nation states around the world have recognized that the new form of soft and hard power is cyber, and that the physical world and digital world have converged thanks to the pandemic. And this rapid migration and digital transformation of the Western world allows for it to be more easily colonized. Now, the real question we should be asking is, why was there a blessing of REvil's attack that was systemic in nature to occur over a holiday weekend? And I think that was a direct response to recent economic sanctions. You're seeing geopolitical tension exacerbated and manifest in cyberspace. I would say one more thing, though, that Lisa Monaco, the Deputy Attorney General for the United States government, the fact that she reclassified ransomware attacks as active terrorism really allows for the US government agencies who have been restricted in employing a more draconian response to these threat actors to now take the gloves off. And I do think that Chris Ingalls, who's now the Director of National Security for the entirety of the United States, and folks like Jennifer Easterly, who's running CISA, these folks know what needs to be done. They know it's a three-pronged strategy: one of prevention and stopping attacks, another of disrupting the dark web, and finally one of empowering the workforce and the cyber community at large, not only with more personnel, but with greater information sharing. We have to get together as a community and realize, for the vendors out there that compete with me, know that I don't see myself as competing with you. We're competing with the dark web. We collectively should be working better together to deal with and disrupt the dark web as a whole.
No, I think that's a great point, and it's something I think is naturally truly important as well. As a constant reminder here is we are better together, stronger together, as a community, as vendors together. That we all have one shared aim, and that's to make the world a safer place from cyber attacks. Tom, you touched on a piece there with geopolitical tensions, and I want to touch into the G7 summit, and of course. President Biden and President Putin, ultimately sparred over cybersecurity and ransomware just a month ago. And Biden said that America's critical infrastructure should be off limits to attacks. And there's another question here that I will harbor just for 2 seconds, but he also gave a list of 16 specific entities which should be continuously off limit. I know that, of course, you're tracking all of this and have continued to have a lot of commentary in the media around this. So can you discuss this a little bit deeper into the 16 specific entities? And, what do you think the proposed agreements necessarily were that was really spoken about between Biden and Putin in that scenario?
So no agreement was reached. They agreed to discuss this for 6 months. In fact, the second and most important meeting between the two sides is occurring tomorrow. And I do think that this is a come to Jesus meeting between the teams on what happened over the July 4th weekend. I think before we discuss their meeting, we should discuss the importance of NATO and how NATO amended their charter saying a cyber attack against critical infrastructures of NATO countries could be perceived, if it's destructive in nature, or if it's, integrity attack for that matter, could be perceived as an attack against all, and that they could react with collective response, not limited to cyber, but that could include the kinetic response. It was fundamental that he had that card in his pocket. But the challenge here is that you have these proxies. The Russians are notorious and legendary throughout history of using proxies to do their biddings. And they have these cyber militias that consist of cyber criminals and cybercrime cartels who collaborate and cooperate with the intelligence services in terms of, when called upon to be patriotic. I'll leave that there. I will say, though, that today I woke up this morning to realize that most of REvil's infrastructure had been sinkholed and knocked offline.
Yep. Yeah, I saw that. That as well.
This is an example of a limited proportional response to that threat actor group, which of course will pop up again somewhere else, but a limited proportional response preceding tomorrow's meeting. I do think in tomorrow's meeting, if they don't see action on the part of the Russians to stop harboring these groups and to actually incarcerate them, if not do whatever else needs to be done with these groups, I do think that there will be a second shoe that will drop.
Yeah, I think that's a great point as well. I saw that this morning as well, and it was not only positive news in the sense of sinkholing all of their infrastructure, but also naturally a direct response and continuing to have that direct response to ensuring that we get away with it, not letting these bad actors just continuously driving this insurgency without a response. And I think also when looking at potential agreements and potential ways, do you think that there's positive news on the end of this? Do you think that Russia will start to identify and disrupt those accountable for the cyber attacks? Or taking that away from just one nation, do you think the nations who have bad actors who are responsible for these attacks, wherever they may be, will start to take action moving forward?
No, I don't. There may be, one group that be, handed off as an offering. There will be a show trial where they won't actually serve time. But I think a lot of nation states, particularly nation states whose economies are not thriving, realize that cyber criminals are kind of like national assets. They represent a dark side of their own little Silicon Valley. And for that matter, they are not only national assets, but they can help offset economic sanctions, and thus many times are viewed as Robin Hoods. So I think this is a deeper conundrum that we face. Putin gave himself an out in the meetings, as he stated to the press, saying that most attacks originate from the United States. So look at Kaseya. Kaseya is a great example. I feel badly for them. If you look at the breadth of the Kaseya attack, that looks like a massive attack originating from the United States against MSPs, then tendrilled into their customers. But guess what? It didn't originate truly in the United States. It obviously originated with a zero-day exploit that was handed off to REvil somewhere in Eastern Europe. So, like I said before, this insurgency will continue. It's really a question of when and how NATO will respond in a cyber context, and whether that level of proportionate response actually strikes a nerve so that they realize that we now have shared risk, as they say, to deter bad actors.
No, absolutely. And Tom, you wrote an article, a white paper report, Iron Rain report, earlier on in the year, understanding the nation state motives and APT groups as well. Can you give our listeners an insight into what you dug into that report and why they should go and obviously take a more deeper read into the report itself?
Yeah, I think it's all about history. You have to appreciate the fact that, if you're specific to Russian threat actor groups, as that report was, is that they are the best of the best. They are the most elite, most sophisticated threat actor groups that we've been dealing with as a community. They're playing a significant game of chess with us. And to be successful in fighting them, you have to play chess as well. And you really need to create a knight's fork. How do you actually force them to lose their queen? And their queen is really the secondary C2 on a sleep cycle. But more importantly, that queen is the protection racket and the trust that is implicitly given them, so long as they don't actually target anything that is Russian. And so how do you effectively go after destabilizing those two things? And how do you look at the methodologies and the consistently evolving kill chains by these major threat actor groups, whether it's APT28, APT29, whether it's Turla, whether it's Sandworm? I can keep going, but the point of the matter is you have to appreciate their genius in order to fight them in hand-to-hand combat. You have to appreciate that nowadays, for example, PowerShell is not the name of the game for lateral movement or living off the land techniques for these folks. They would prefer using .NET. And then what is your capacity to detect and respond for the malicious misuse of .NET, or the malicious misuse of Teams within your environment, which you implicitly trust? And so it's really an interesting, eye-opening report. It begins with a history, beginning with the famous speech by General Gerasimov, who's the head of Strategic Command for Russia, at a Black Sea resort in 2013, where he highlights that the only way Russia can become a juggernaut and a hegemon again, is to really focus on the weaknesses of the West. And the weaknesses of the West are the dependence on public opinion, for the trust and confidence in institutions, coupled with this over-dependence and over-reliance on technology. And that's really what the eye-opening part is here, is that they realized that they didn't have the capability to go toe-to-toe with the NSA or toe-to-toe with Silicon Valley back then. And then they realized, well, where do we get the talent? We got these great cyber criminals over here that have been hunting American and Western banks since 1995. And why don't we just force them to become, patriotic with their endeavors once in a while? And that's what's changed. And it's fascinating. Someone should do a movie about it. But yeah, so I call that Iron Rain.
Yeah, we should certainly find the budget for the movie. I think that's into next year's budget, but we should definitely do that. I think also one area that you touched there, and it really kind of digs into the trends that we're seeing with these particular attacks. And I want to talk over what's really relevant in 2021, but what particular trends are you continuing to see throughout this year with the attacks that we're starting to see? And digging into, and now obviously we've got people tuning in as well watching this. What should they be looking at? Where should they be homing into and really starting to look at and changing maybe their mentality when looking at security posture, for example?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, please appreciate that the end goal of these adversaries is to turn you into a Kaseya. You don't have to be a technology provider to be turned into a Kaseya. Okay, so please stop calling this supply chain attacks. It's island hopping. They're going to use your house to attack your dinner guests at Thanksgiving dinner. It's about a home invasion, not a burglary. They don't ever leave. They don't want to leave, and they want to use your environment to attack your customers and your constituency. And if they don't have any utility for that, they will share it with the intelligence services who do. And if you think you're not going to be targeted because you're not big enough or no one knows who your brand is, realize that maybe next week you're going to put out that press release about the great government contract you just got, or the great partnership you have with Bank A or technology provider B, and then you will become a target. So the game has changed, and you need to stop them from using your digital transformation to attack your customers and partners. Number one. Number two is they are more willing now to get into a knife fight with you as a defender. Counter incident response is surging, and many times that escalates to actually integrity attacks or destructive attacks. So you have to really be able to suppress them in real time, unbeknownst to them. You have to be able to hunt them in real time, unbeknownst to them. So you need greater telemetry, and that telemetry should go beyond your endpoint and or network, but actually into the fabric of your infrastructure itself, so it can intrinsically allow you to suppress the intrusion. And for me, zero trust is more than zero trust. It's like, really, what does that manifest to an adversary? Well, for me, it's about, can you detect, deceive, divert, contain, and hunt an adversary in real time, unbeknownst to an adversary? And if you can holistically employ zero trust throughout your entire infrastructure, and on top of that, be able to literally segment dynamically, manage devices dynamically, specific to threat, either posed to the device or from the device to the infrastructure, you can really begin to decrease dwell time, inhibit lateral movement, and prevent the reality that they may use your infrastructure to attack your partners and customers.
Yeah, and on the zero trust point as well, I find it truly fascinating, especially when I'm speaking to customers, that a lot of customers see zero trust as this big strategy that they haven't even dug into yet, and it's like looking like this big thing that they've got to look at. And actually, when we start to dig in deeper, like, the journey's already started. We are remote. We are asking the questions. We're asking for potentially continual authentication paths. And I think that's another good point that I certainly would like to emphasize here today, is that we are on this journey, and you guys are on this journey as well. You are certainly starting to break down those barriers, and don't see zero trust as this implementation strategy which needs to be done overnight. I think that's the key area as well, is ensuring that this zero trust is a journey, and it's a continuous journey. It's a learning curve. It's going to continue to evolve over time. But if you can answer the questions, as Tom, you just said, and start to really get to a point where you are saying to your endpoint, for example, I want to know which user, which device that is, and the threat posture or the security posture of that device. Can I make a decision on whether I'm going to allow you into the network or not to get to that application? If if you can continue to do that, you're certainly on the journey. And I think it's truly important to emphasize that don't look at zero trust as that one stop all, but that journey ahead in that sense as well.
And to underscore that, let's pay attention to the dark reality of this year. There's been more 0 days that have been employed against infrastructures and corporations this year than all of the last 3 to 4 years. And it'll get worse by the end of the year. It's a perfect weapon. We all know it's a perfect weapon because it gets around your perimeter immediately. That being said, though, if hardening fails, then what? What are your compensating controls when hardening inevitably fails? Because there's no way for you to keep up with the 0-day development cycle, especially when nation states are hunting either your technology provider or you yourself. And really, it's about how do you detect and respond to that insertion of the syringe being the 0-day. Once the syringe appears inside of the body, can your body defend against the syringe? Metaphorically, of course. That being said, we need to build in rings of defense that are really focused outward. And what I mean by that is the architectural models that are consistently espoused are much like fortifications. They're all about defense in depth. I think they should be inverted. It should be about inside-out security. They should look a lot more like a prison, a supermax prison, than that of a castle.
I couldn't agree more. And to kind of touch on touching on the Thanksgiving dinner table element earlier. I always see that, especially from an inside-out perspective, and exactly what you're talking about there, especially when we thinking about detection and response capabilities in the home invasion scenario. Looking at that from a point of view is if you've got a security camera on the front door, that may be well, and you may be able to stop the outside, but do you know what's going on the inside? Do you know who's sitting at that Thanksgiving table? Do you know who's upstairs in your home? Do you know who's in? That's exactly, visibility and context is key. It's where it really starts for me. In that sense, it's the same in the prison scenario. Do you know if somebody's left that particular cell and where they've traveled? What's their lateral movement across the prison? In that sense as well.
Wait,
Tom, we're
touch on this. Going back to our initial discussion. I grew up in Guatemala in the 80s, really dark times. Okay, yes, we had a panic room, and I became obsessed with security with this construct of how my house was protected. You had the compound. During a civil war, you had the guards, the gates, the barbed wire. Then you had the home with the bars on the windows, and then you had the alarms. You had the guard dogs. You had the bodyguards, both internal and external, and then you still had the panic room, because those things had to trigger. But you needed the telemetry to associate that the gate was breached, the home was breached, the guards were shot or dead, the dog was incapacitated, to know when you had to go to that safe room. And I think, honestly, tragically, this is where we're going. This is how we must defend now. We need to assume that the perimeter will collapse. We need to assume that the adversary will have administrative rights. And we need to assume that there are 2 C2s, one of which are on a sleep cycle.
I couldn't agree more. The way I look at it is think about a missile siren. Think about it from that point of view. The missile siren has to go off 2 to 3 to 4 minutes earlier for us to be able to get to the panic room, to be able to protect ourselves. If that's going off 10 seconds before, the likelihood is we're not going to get to the panic room. So, from that point of view, I completely agree with you there. Tom, I want to finish off on a subject that I know we have mentioned it today, and I really want to home in on this, and I know you want to spend a few minutes on it as well, but it goes without saying that the dark web is, of course, truly powerful in today's age. What should we be doing as cyber experts? And as we're speaking to other vendors on this platform as well, what should we be doing as cyber experts to disrupt the dark web and start really shifting the power onto our side of the table?
Disrupting the dark web is a multi-pronged process. I think for too long, we've been focusing on dealing with the weaponry that have been coming out of the dark web and the associated attacks. We need to begin to destabilize the bulletproof hosts in the dark web forums where these ephemeral actors conduct business. We need to really hold virtual currencies and alternative payment channels to a higher standard of care as it relates to the misuse of those systems. And we should push our policymakers to modernize forfeiture and anti-money laundering laws so that we can use seized assets from cybercrime and cyber terror and child pornography to fund critical infrastructure protection, to allow for CISA to give out grant money to everything from the water utility in Florida, who was almost attacked the Super Bowl fans with poisonous water, who still hasn't received new resources to fix what was identified. But basically, through the great efforts of Secret Service and FBI, the adversary was pushed out of the system. Now, this is the problem. No one knows where the money can come from. Everyone argues that there is insufficient budget. Number one, there's budget. The budget can be taken out of the dark web and it can be used to fund critical infrastructure protection. Number two, within your own organization, realize that your chief marketing officer has created greater attack surface for you through development of the mobile app, to the development of the website, to the email campaigns, and thus they must be responsible for brand protection. And thus they must be giving a portion of their budget towards brand protection that you, the CISO, should be using.
I couldn't agree more. Brand protection. And we've seen across this year, right, we've seen how critical the brand protection really has to be. And I think that's such a great point that, Tom, you've certainly finished off on there. Tom, thank you, first and foremost. And before we jump into the Q&A, I just want to say, guys and girls listening in, you have it. You've seen Tom take us from the journey of his childhood through to disrupting the dark web. It's been truly exhilarating. I buckled myself up for this ride, and I can tell you it's been a bit of a roller coaster, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. Tom, there's been a couple of questions on the Q&A, so you ready to...
One thing for the audience.
No, go ahead.
The cyber fraud task forces are open to all. If you're in cybersecurity, join the cyber fraud task force in the major city near you, put on by DHS and the Secret Service and local law enforcement. And they are not US centric. They exist in Europe, they exist in Asia, they exist in Latin America. But join the cyber fraud task force near you, please. Just for greater dialogue, greater exchanges, more information sharing, and more importantly, for the community, to interact with the community at greater length.
It's, as we said earlier, we are stronger together, and we will get a tweet out on that, by the way. So we will get a tweet out. We'll find the URL. We'll get the tweet out so you guys can be directed where to go and how to sign up to your local, and wherever you are in the world, your local cyber task force. Tom, are you ready to jump into a couple of questions on the Q&A?
Sure, let's do it.
There's a good question that's come in, and I know it's something that you're super passionate about. So I wanted to make sure that we asked you this question and give you the opportunity to answer it. So one of our listeners, Tom, has asked, first they asked about my t-shirt and where they can get it. But secondly, they asked us to explain who are the Howlers and what do we do. So Tom, naturally, this is your job to do this.
Yeah, so the Howlers are trusted advisors. They are authorities and experts in cybersecurity specific to a given industry vertical. So, for example, I'm an authority on financial sector security and federal and state and local government systems security. James, you are?
So I look after, I focus into healthcare, of course, a big passion of mine, and also in the private sector as well, which is a real big passion of mine as well.
And so what we are is they're not limited to employees of VMware and Carbon Black. It's many times other CISOs who are like-minded, but all of which who conduct regular threat hunting and who have been trained on the original EDR capability of Carbon Black. So it's a greater community than just the folks here at VMware. But within VMware, there are 19 of us, 20 if you include our CSO, Alex Toshev. And we are continuing to grow the community. The responsibility of all Howlers is to know what they don't know, to acknowledge when they don't know something, and to find the answer.
That's it. And we truly sit by that as well. I can tell you that from the bottom of my heart. And also I can personally say just what an honor it is to be around those 19 other people as well. It's, and I can speak on behalf of the 19, 20 others in that sense. Also, not necessarily a question, Tom, that's come through, but certainly a facet of true cybersecurity that's been commented on. I just wanted to see your thoughts on it. Stephen Mason said that 5 facets to true cybersecurity is: number 1, people and culture; 2, leadership and governance; 3, technology; 4, policies and procedure; and then finally, and 5th, data and information management. Do you have any thoughts around that? Do you think how accurate do you think that is? And do you think there's any further information you'd like to give Steve on that?
It's a great starting point. Two areas that I'd like to flesh out real quick. Number one, when it comes to governance, governance only counts if the CISO no longer reports to the CIO. Your defensive coordinator can no longer report to your offensive coordinator. I think that's been heavily illustrated over the last 18 months. Number two, when it comes to data, encryption isn't enough. Adversaries are constantly stealing the keys that unlock the encryption on a regular basis. In fact, they use encryption, they use VPN tunnels to obfuscate their activities and their lateral movement in the majority of events, which is why perimeter defenses were not as effective during the pandemic because of this implicit trust placed on VPNs for remote access. I can keep going, but yes, I think it's a great starting point, but there have to be some bare bones. Like the CISO not reporting to CIO and having veto authority over anything the CIO does that could increase the attack surface.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more in that sense, and I think especially time over this last 18 months, and you highlighted there, and just to re-emphasize, I think it's truly important that we, and I'm talking on the broader CISO community here, we all start reporting to the head coach, we all start reporting to the same place, and really getting that emphasis of security, whether it's from a marketing angle, from a brand protection angle, from a governance angle, to ensuring that we ultimately get the board's attention first and foremost, to really show how we can help and how security is such a pivotal part to that strategy itself. There was one final question, and Tom, I'm going to ask you, before I just answer it, I'm going to ask you again, just to, because there have been a couple of questions on the restaurants that we mentioned earlier. So do you just want to remind everyone what your favorite restaurant is and where it is?
Barcelona on 14th Street in DC.
14th Street in DC, Barcelona. Mine, South Tel Aviv, Hachkalin. I can't put my Israeli accent on for you all to probably pronounce that, but it's a bistro in South Tel Aviv. Tom, as always, this has been absolutely exhilarating. Thoroughly enjoyed having you on. I know you'll be on the stream soon as well. I think in September, you'll be back on. We'll be talking about VMworld back then, and of course how we're going to be bringing security to a further light at VMworld as well, which I'm super excited about. To all of our listeners, thank you for attending the Ask the Howlers, a cybersecurity roundtable for security leaders. Just before I finish off, Tom, is there anything else you want to say before we turn off?
Yeah, I want everyone to be aware that in a few weeks, just in time for Black Hat, we're going to be unveiling our global incident response report. Again, it's not just the thoughtfulness from our own threat analysis units and our Howlers, but 142 IR and MSSP partners that contribute to this study. And it's definitely worth a read. If you really want to understand, how the kill chains are changing and evolving, how the adversaries are fighting back to maintain persistence, how counter incident response is escalating. Take a read. It's not long. I think it's about 12 to 14 pages, but we'll see where it is after legal gets done with it.
There you go. In a few weeks' time, I'm no doubt about it, we'll be able to get that out. And I'm sure we'll do an Ask the Howlers on it as well at some point. I'm sure we can certainly schedule that in. Tom, for the final time, thank you so much for joining us today. Again, truly an honor to have you on. Just before I do go, to all of our listeners, first off, we're always keen with the Howlers and on the Ask the Howlers show, we're always keen to get the topics that you'll be interested in. This session, this recording is, or this live session, should I say, not recording, is for you guys and girls out there. So please feel free to drop in the suggestions in the comments, and we'll get one of our viewer suggestions on some of the next Howler live streams as well. And of course, secondly, you may be aware that just over a month ago, we had the VMware Security Connect event. That is now on demand. It is virtual. It is free. It is still worth watching. Sign up, register, get yourself involved there. You'll get latest insights into our security innovations, hear from our leaders, hear from Tom himself, and then hear from myself, hear from Rick McElroy as well, updates on our strategy, and of course, listen to further talk tracks in there as well. And just with the VMworld 2021, the registrations are now open. October the 5th to October the 7th. It is virtual. We are super looking forward to getting back to in-person events. But this one is virtual, October the 5th to October the 7th. But with that, wherever you are, good morning, good afternoon, and of course from me, good night. I look forward to seeing you all in a month. Take care.